Hi there. Welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I have Dr. Andrew Hill with me. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
I am delighted to have you. We are going to talk all about brains. But before we do that, I would love for you to tell the audience a little bit about you and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a neuroscientist, a cognitive neuroscientist. So I think about how brains produce aspects of the mind in terms of my education and training. But I've done a lot of work with neurodevelopmental populations, kids, adults with atypical brains. And I founded a company called Peak Brain Institute, which helps people understand their brains through something called brain mapping or quantitative EEG. And then do neurofeedback or biofeedback on their brains and bodies to help change regulatory strategies and take control from a regulatory perspective. And out of that, I've written a book called Gifted and Tortured that helps people hopefully understand a little bit about how their brains work. So that's my little thumbnail.
I love it. And okay, let's just go right in. Why is the book called Gifted and Tortured? Please.
Yeah, the idea, and I think any parent of a kid who has a little atypical, unusual, quirky brain will get this instantly, is that often the same resources that are cramping up and providing a little bit of dysregulation will also, under other contexts or environments or just different, amount of fatigue, will operate really well, more powerfully. The classic example is the ADHD kid who's the best athlete or the best artist, but they're not the best at doing their taxes or their basic, sitting through history class. So you have this sort of disconnect where some resources may be biased in a certain direction. And especially with things like ADHD, we can think about this in a phenotype perspective, not a diagnostic perspective. And so I spent 25 years roughly sitting down with people thus far, going over their brains and saying, hey, here's how your brain is built. And the gift and the curse of brain mapping is that it's not diagnostically precise. It doesn't fit a DSM, set of criteria. It's showing brain activity. So you can say you have this brain activity in this part of the brain. That's a true statement. And you can say, and it's this unusual compared to other kids your age or adults your age. That's true. The meaning is less precise. And initially, that's sort of a frustrating aspect. Brain mapping is, it's somewhat accurate for picking up things like ADHD and anxiety and sleep issues. And you always want to do attention testing. So classic go, no go style computerized testing alongside it, which gives you a much tighter read about executive function things. But sitting down with people and describing to them, here's how your brain is built, this resource, that resource, you start to develop a perspective and help people develop a perspective that is not just the thing happening to them, the suffering, the label that was applied. And I started seeing people develop this sense of relief, the sense of agency, the sense of uh, letting go of some suffering, letting go of some shame. Because, I mean, if you see you're suffering on a bit of data, you can be frustrated at your broken shoulder on the x-ray. You're probably not mad at it though. And when it comes to your brain, it's invisible. Our suffering's often not the same, obviously until we open our mouths or start moving or something. And it has this dysregulated typical resource phenomena where instead of it being about here's the disease process or the illness process, it's more about here's a natural resource you have a variant of and it operates in this way. Your version might be tuned this way or have adapted this way or, be more biased in a certain way. And for many of the regulatory resources, executive function, stress and anxiety, sleep, speed of processing, sensory processing, social processing, they're not fixed. They're not like language. If you have a kid who's 10 years old, who has no productive language and no receptive language, their brain isn't that plastic with regards to language anymore. But you got somebody who's not sleeping at 10 or 40, the sleep can be re-regulated. The brain learned how to adapt to the environment. We had to adapt our sleep schedules, our social processing, our sensory, integration. We had to adjust that and have to adjust that in our lives naturally to succeed. So these resources that don't have a locked down critical period, the same way as language does, tend to respond really well to change, to applying pressure, lifestyle hacks, biofeedback, other things you can do. And so out of this practice I do of sitting down and teaching the brain first so people have the agency. They tell me what's important. I then build interventions for them. They pursue them. We remap. My role moved into that of coach and less of doctor. And I moved further and further away from, uh, here's the diagnosis, here's the specific thing. I know what's happening. Instead, it's like, okay, here's your brain. You know better than anyone else what you're experiencing. And as I teach people to read their brain maps, their QEEGs, they become experts at reading data way better than I can, especially over time as things change and they feel it. Well, the language around these phenotypes started to coalesce and crystallize, and I came up with about a dozen different areas of the brain that I think capture much of what we consider gifts and torture, especially in a neurodevelopmental, kid population, things like ADHD and anxiety, social sensitivity, sleep dysregulations. These are phenomena that are not, you know, only given labels in a DSM. So there's my long-winded answer.
So let me, whoa, and that was a lot. And so let me ask another question just to see if I've understood. What you just said now is there are more, but you've identified 12 kind of types of brain activity that correspond semi-reliably to some kind of behavioral mapping.
Yeah, exactly. Certain phenotypes we all carry around that are stable for you, that are real features in terms of they tend to show up in people, and they tend to mean something. There's a plausible interpretation. So really classic for, let's say, anxiety. The front middle of the brain, the anterior cingulate's job is to sort of select from the thoughts you're having and let the proper thought stream assemble, let the value, the moment of what I care about, what I'm thinking about, assemble itself. And some of that has to be reconciling different streams of information that are, rising to the surface. This part of the brain, the anterior cingulate, uses beta waves, EEG waves called beta, to do its job. Beta is like a flexing of a muscle. And it uses alpha to relax that resource. And both are present at once. And uses theta to lift its foot off the brakes. Most of the cortex uses that pattern. And so if you see someone's brain that has lots and lots of beta waves in the front midline and not a lot of alpha, you would say, ooh, hey, your brain's making lots of beta right there. Your anterior cingulate, your little CEO, might be micromanaging. That's sort of the common experience. Do you perseverate or are you obsessive? And the person starts laughing, or their wife does, or their parent does. In the background, this is very common to hear somebody in the family start laughing when we're talking about a brain map. So you can see the cramping up of that resource, or common, having lots of theta in that resource, in that circuit, will produce a song stuck in your head or biting your nails.
Oh, I have both of those. Damn. Okay. Hold on just a second.
Sure.
Because I want to just point something out that is super obvious, perhaps to you, and maybe obvious also to the audience, and I don't think can be repeated enough, which is there is an internal neurological reality to behavior. And you are among the people who are making this explicit, but I don't think there are enough resources that do this. And so to point out, right, the type of brainwave in a certain brain area pretty reliably corresponds to a behavior that occurs either internally or externally. Yes?
Yes, you can predict the plausibility. It doesn't deterministically say this is happening. Like you wouldn't see ADHD and say, aha, ADHD. But the marker for ADHD is high theta over beta. In a non-sleep deprived population, that's about 94% predictive. Having front midline beta, though, like I described, I might think someone has a bit of OCD or some song stuck in their head, or a tic, a blink tic or a cough tic are really common in kids. But I wouldn't know that's true. They might just actually be a CEO and have a high-powered brain that's latching onto things powerfully. It might be normal. It's unusual. And that's the wrinkle, is that we're like, okay, look at it. Brains are weird. You're weird. Good job. The goal is not to make you average. The middle of the bell curve is not that special. Let's talk about all the quirkiness in your brain that sticks out in a real way, electrophysiologically, and start to model using some performance data that is valid, using some electrophysiology that's got data validity, but the meaning is hard to construct. And you sort of emerge really easily for a lot of people into a place of there's my ADHD, there's my anxiety, there's my speed of processing issue. Um, I can't tell you the number of people I'm like, oh, here's the thing in your maps. And they're like, oh my gosh, yes. And it wasn't any of the things they came in for or wanted to know about. And so you can see these resources. And just seeing that sometimes gives you the permission to succeed. I mean, I do a lot of this thing called neurofeedback or biofeedback on the brain, but every so often, I had a dad who'd bring a kid in a couple of years ago. Here's a good example. And he was a kid who I think he was 16 and a half, and he was in a senior year of high school, I believe. And he was maybe junior year, and he was not going to succeed at college. He was academically, failing at the end of his third year, I think, in high school, and he was struggling, and he was super ADHD, but he had this like incredible, we measured stamina, and we measured speed of processing, and a few other things that were really powerful, and then massive amounts of disinhibition on the part of the brain that stabilizes your attention. We call that ADHD. There's the precentral gyrus, left and right, gyri. The left one stabilizes and puts you in gear and keeps you there so you can do the thing and not wander off into the bushes. And the right one knows if you're doing the thing. So you can like, hey, let's adjust up ahead. We're going to turn. We're going to, modify. And those two areas, again, use beta waves to flex their stabilizer and supervisor roles. And the one on the right makes lots of theta, and we become disinhibited. Squirrel, the supervisor isn't supervising. The left one becomes disinhibited, makes lots of alpha, neutral, and we become a little bit spacey and don't stabilize our attention. And the same resource will often turn off executive function so we can stay asleep at night. So you often get inattentiveness with sleep maintenance issues, which happens to kids with ADD, as well as a lot of middle-aged women start getting ADD and sleep maintenance issues. So
I feel like you're like looking inside my head. I'm not very comfortable right now, honestly.
Sorry.
I'm kidding. But yes. Okay, now here's what
it
I want to ask.
It resonates because I'm describing the physiology of a system you experience. So you are already an expert in some of these features. And so you're not like, whoa, brain stuff sounds confusing. You're like, oh, wait, that's how it's built. Oh. And people's experience looking at their brain on data gives them that freedom. That 16-year-old, I showed him his brain, his super ADHD. I talked about how theta responds to intensity. That's why he's an amazing sport person, video game player, but why math is hard. And he heard it, and he, went away. And I thought I was going to get another neurofeedback client and do a couple months of training and change his brain and send him up to college. Didn't hear from him. 4 years later, dad reached out and said, hey, wanted to thank you. Whatever you said, it's all he needed. Soared through the last year of college, just graduated really, really well in top of his class in his college class. So just a little bit of perspective. Took this kid who was failing in high school, went, oh, that's how my executive function works. That's how my sleep works. That's how my intensity, stimulus, and speed of processing. Okay. And he was so smart. He didn't need very much more than a little bit of a guide, map to say, look, here's this thing, here's some strengths, here's some things you might want to work towards or, accommodate. And he understood it. And he was able to take that information and structure some study. I gave him some sleep coaching, around how's your circadian rhythm. You don't want to eat before bed because you precess your blood sugar and create, some difficulty. And I taught him a few little tricks, and he used them, and he's crushed college and, managed to get through it without hating it, which was a big win. And, I don't know what he's doing now. I should reach out. But yeah, so I see that kind of thing every so often. Just the agency, just seeing it's like, oh, okay.
It's a great example. Okay, you said something earlier, and I really want to come back to it, which is you alluded to the quirkiness of your brain. And I think what I heard you maybe not say or maybe say is we don't want to get rid of that.
Yeah.
So I want you to speak to, we don't want to generify, if that's even a word, brains because they're unique and beautiful and quirky and special and whatever. What's your guideline? How do you think of this? Like, and hopefully the question I'm asking is clear. And if it's not, please ask me a follow up.
I think it is. You can definitely ask more. But one thing to think about when doing neurofeedback or other forms of brain changing, be it meditation or something else, is that you're changing regulatory resources often. You're not moving something from one place to another. Mm-hmm. You're taking a resource that's supposed to be malleable and supposed to be able to tune itself, and you're giving it the range that it might lack. So in someone with ADHD, and we all know people like this, they can hyperfocus given the right intensity and interest, generally, better than the average person, actually. But, don't make them sit in a cubicle with no stimulus, or just a spreadsheet, generally. Not ideal. So the intensity, the pattern matching, the novelty seeking is biased in these people to be strong. And so, I think there's some evidence, there's some at least rationale, it's a good rubric of the sort of hunter versus gatherer. We need hunters, we need gatherers, heads down, low intensity, sustained attention versus pattern matching, novelty seeking, associating interesting ideas, the competitive thinker outside the box. I think there's something to that. But in a modern world, you might be biased towards sitting in one place that it's hard to do. It's hard to sit in history class if you have tons of theta and your brain's like shiny object, or you're hyperverbal, and you're being asked to do a math class and you have 2 language areas and you're dyscalculic or something, that happens all the time. I see kids who have dyslexia and diagnoses, and they come in with the language stuff. Dyslexia is captured or picked up on, but so many kids, the only problem they have is their math class. You look at their brain and the 2 math and language areas, the math area is unusual, and the kid's hyperverbal, and you're like, oh, okay, you're over allocated, dude, or young miss, yeah, exactly. But it's
definitely over allocated.
Over allocated.
Language department.
It gives you a different way of using language.
Yeah.
If you do have bilateral language, which happens sometimes, and you're a woman, you're going to have better integration between the hemispheres, like our corpus callosum. Protected against losing language from stroke. You can probably think in language symbolically in a way that most people have a hard time doing. So yeah, good job. Good on you.
I don't even need a brain scan. You just read me right now.
That's the thing. Back to the book. You don't even need a brain scan. You can just learn about the phenotypes, the 12 that I think are often in the way the most. I've already mentioned a few of them. We have the CEO in the front. She tends to get a little micromanagey. Think of this, think of this, think of this. And the lifeguard in the back. The front of the brain is the inside self, and the back of the brain is the outside world. The high-level cognitive stuff we're thinking about very far forward. And the anterior cingulate will orient our attention, stabilize it in terms of the internal stream, while the posterior cingulate, your lifeguard, is often going, watch the road, watch the road. And that can be useful and adaptive, but if we learn the world isn't especially safe, then our lifeguard starts looking for sharks in the indoor pool. And that can be an accommodation, a cramp that is uncomfortable. So you look at this unusually powerful posterior cingulate and say, wow, this area is really strong. That often creates a threat sensitivity, a rumination, a fearfulness. Oh, that sounds true for you, person? Oh, that's uncomfortable. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. There it is. And then it's not about tranquilizing it in this example. You stretch it back out. You give them the ability to regulate their stress response appropriately, to not cramp up into a trauma response. Mm-hmm. And the person is now able to handle a crisis without dysregulating, come back to ground. They're not calm like a Zen monk through it necessarily, but they have that regulatory reserve to come back to a resilient place. And that's true in ADHD. The person can play video games, and they can also put down the video games and come to dinner, because the step down of intensity is not painful if your theta is not, involuntarily surging all the time. Or somebody with a high-powered brain, a CEO who has OCD, you can take away the intrusive thoughts without losing the ability to hyper-focus like it's your job. Mm-hmm. You might even be able to focus better if it's not always cramped up.
Talk a little bit about that, which is, I think sometimes humans are afraid of, I mean, I think it comes down to like the devil we know versus the devil we don't. So, how in a clinical way, when you're working with people, how do you push through like this is going to change the way your brain works
Yeah.
and get past? I imagine there are sometimes are objections, or maybe there aren't, and this is an irrelevant question. I don't know.
It's a great question. It's not a relevant question. People do wonder that. And then they start doing it and they stop wondering.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you go to the gym, oh my God, I'm changing my body.
Right.
What's that going to be like? And like
Yeah.
a weekend, you're like, ooh, my butt is feeling pretty good. My sleep was nice last night.
Yeah.
That happens here too. So I get calls from a parent saying, wait, it's like 2 weeks in. I just asked my kid to take the trash out. He got up and did it. I asked one time, what is going on?
Yes.
That kind of phenomenon. Or like, my kid is reading for pleasure. Well, I've never seen, he asked for a book. What is happening?
Yeah.
And, all this kind of like self-organized behavior, executive function, desire to do lower stimulus, but more engaged work.
Mm-hmm.
This is what shows up when doing neurofeedback or when teaching a kid to meditate or teaching a kid to regulate their sleep habits. The educational piece of it, the psychoeducation, the agency that comes with it is powerful, even if your kid's not typical.
Yeah.
Even if your kid is having seizures and language difficulties and doesn't quite understand everything you're saying, the agency, the education about here's how your body works, little dude. Here's what makes you, not drink enough water, makes you too tired, can make you have seizures more easily. Let's make sure you eat good protein. That'll help your sleep. These things are useful, I think, if you're 10
Mm-hmm.
or if you're, 50. And the phenotype model of, hey, and here's the resources, not the diagnoses, gives a path through that's educational, that's not just, I am now the doctor applying a label, or here's the thing happening to me. It's instead, oh, wait, my brain's got interesting resources. That's kind of cool. I want to know how they work. And it gives you, and if I taught you and you're welcome to get a brain map, I'll show you your brain. That the experience usually is, the stuff we're asking about, hey, here's a thing, it might be something, is stuff you already know about. We're not saying, here's a random thing about you that might be true. And you're like, oh my gosh, really? It's more like, here's a thing. And you're like, yeah, that sounds just like me. Or like, oh my gosh, yes, that's why I'm here. Can you help?
Yeah.
And both are valid. Yes, here's the thing. It's real.
Yeah.
That's the perspective that I think brain mapping gives. And that does move people away from the idea of it being stock or being a disease process. If they understand the resource itself,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of unsticking it or stretching it or getting more regulatory range makes a lot of sense, I think. Because like, think of trauma response. You don't necessarily want to not be able to react when someone cuts you off in traffic, but you might want to not react when your husband's being a jerk.
Right.
And
Right.
those the bias towards the environment being irritating or threatening, it's a regulatory range that we're set in a little bit and then tuned in by the environment, by the experience, by how we started off.
Yeah.
So I think people understand this intuitively, and the idea of shifting that range makes sense ahead of time. And once it starts to be felt, it makes a lot of sense. So people are a little surprised by it sometimes. Oh, wait, I think I'm feeling calm. Wait, I'm feeling calm. This is kind of nice.
Well, this is
Stuff
really
like that.
interesting because so many pediatric in particular, I guess a lot of interventions really are behavioral. They're coming
Yeah.
at us from the outside in. What you're proposing is a little like trap door, a little back door straight into the mechanism itself through neurofeedback, if I'm understanding
Involuntary
correctly.
training. Yeah, we're doing operant conditioning. This is just Skinner's bitch pigeons being taught to pack a certain way because they already pack. You applaud or reward
Yeah.
or shape behavior and get the behavior to shift. In this case, the behavior is brainwaves,
Yeah.
which you can't feel.
Yeah.
So biofeedback in the brain, in this case, in this way, is involuntary. It's shaping of the EEG.
Yeah.
I mentioned those cingulates, which are involved with stabilizing and supervising or inattentiveness and impulsivity. You put a couple wires above those areas and measure the beta you're making moment to moment. Whenever the beta happens to surge on its own, applaud that with audio and visual. The brain's like, ooh, I like stuff. What's that? And then the brain moves in the wrong direction. The game slows down or stops. And the brain's like, wait, hey, where's my stuff? And a couple of seconds later, it happens to move some beta up and the game reacts. And the big trick with neurofeedback usually is you threshold or adapt. So every 30 seconds to a minute, the computer moves next to where your brain is and waits for those flexing moments. Most neurofeedback works that way, that passive reinforcement, where it's just auditory and visual saying, good job, brain, good job, brain, good job, brain, again and again. There are some forms that zap or send electricity in. I don't generally use those. Most forms of neurofeedback, about 3 sessions in is when you first feel it, not the first time. It can happen. About one person out of maybe 20 or 25 has that experience the first time, but usually about 3 sessions in, the brain's like, oh, you want alpha, you want beta, here's some. And you get a few hours of increased brain waves, and you're like, wait a minute, am I feeling clear?
Mm.
This might be nice. I don't know, is this real? This isn't real. And it wears off, and you're like, huh, hey, I might have noticed something. Okay. And then if it's beta waves, here's a trick for parents that they will, again, let me teach you something you already know about the brain. Those of you who've either seen cats or have cats, you got a cat on a windowsill watching a bird, that completely liquid bodied and still predator mode, but laser-like focus. Motoric, physically quiescent, attentionally locked in. That's a brainwave called sensory motor rhythm. It's in high gear right then to completely control that moment of body mind. And we use SMR, sensory motor rhythm, on those tissues for the stabilization and supervision. So the cat on the windowsill is literally the opposite of ADHD. Literally.
Yeah.
SMR, sensory motor rhythm, in humans is also called sleep spindles when asleep.
Huh.
So you tend to get sleep spindle stabilization issues in classic ADHD. There's a paper by Martin Arns, A-R-N-S, from Holland, who showed that a lot of ADHD has this beta spindle difficulty at night, and this is why we tend to get sleep dysregulation in ADHD. But just knowing that, you can be less frustrated, but your kid tends to get up 3 times in the night and start thinking about teaching them how their brain works and how circadian rhythms work and what might be, useful to support it. SMR is the same reason that Temple Grandin enjoyed the cow crusher. It's that squeezing of the body, that deep pressure that creates an outside-in sort of stillness command. The body deeply relaxes. This is why our kids that have developmental dysregulation really enjoy deep pressure around their joints. It's that, or deep squeezing or weighted vests. It's that sensory loading that creates the SMR, creates the sensory motor feedback loop, which we use for inhibitory tone, to sit still, to stay asleep, to suppress seizures. And the field of neurofeedback was discovered in the mid-60s because, by mistake, it reduced seizures in a group of animals. Those of you who have cats, maybe skip over this section because it's a rough story. But Dr. Sturman at UCLA was doing experiment on cats and was exposing them to rocket fuel, methylhydrazine. And they were getting, there was a dose-dependent curve that was pretty tight, where minutes meant increased symptoms, nausea, crying, seizure, coma, death for these cats. And he realized a group of the cats, of the 32 of them, 8 of them refused to have seizures. It was 2.5 hours in. They're like, meh, whatever. The other 24 had seizures at 40 minutes in, roughly, or sooner. And he couldn't figure out what he had, discovered. Maybe there's a super cat or a seizure-resistant gene or something. No, he'd done another experiment 6 months prior, where he put a little eyedropper in their mouth and squirted chicken broth in whenever the SMR brainwaves came up, as a reinforcement learning experiment, and showed that within a couple of sessions, you can do reinforcement learning on brainwaves directly. Interesting. Put them back in the subject pool. 6 months later, his subjects showed seizure resistance under irritability, of these chemicals. His lab manager was epileptic and uncontrolled on heavy meds, Dilantin, Tegretol, Mebarol, having tens of seizures a month.
Yeah.
And they made her an auditory feedback machine to train SMR. And she went off all of her meds over the next year and was seizure-free for the next year.
Wow.
That was the start of the field of neurofeedback. And since we see so much overlap in seizure and things that are neurodevelopmental, sleep, CP, autism stuff, atypical bucket stuff, a lot of seizure stuff. So you start getting those kids doing neurofeedback for seizures and see the executive function and the sleep and the other stuff started to jump out. And so neurofeedback became the field of ADHD, the field of autism as a treatment, but out of a seizure, out of a regulatory brainwave that we discovered 60 years ago now. So,
oh my gosh. Okay. You're making me want to do a deep dive into neurofeedback, and we're going to pin this discussion here. If people want to learn more about
Indeed.
you and your book and your work, what do they do, please?
Yeah, especially if you want to learn more about your phenotypes, you can go to giftedandtortured.com. I built a little quiz. It'll ask you questions in lieu of a brain map, and you can find out which of the three or four primary phenotypes might drive some of your gifts and some of your suffering. So come check me out at giftedandtortured.com, or you can go to youtube.com/Dr. Hill, DRHILL. I'm there doing live streams, and you can come hang out and ask questions.
Easy peasy. Andrew Hill, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.